Off to the races with commercial agriculture by starting with mixed crop and livestock. You can probably tell by looking at that term, mixed crop and livestock, what it means. What's happening is you're growing crops on the land while you are also feeding animals and or grazing animals. So the idea is the crops are grown for animal consumption, not for human consumption. We are only going to get those calories in a secondary sense as they come through the animal. Of course, the animals produce manure, and then that manure is either reused on the farm or else it's sold. And of course, you know that if you go to Home Depot or you go to Lowe's, you can find bags of steer manure or chicken manure. This is where this comes from. Take a look at this map. On this map, you can see the areas that I've circled that are light green. Those are the mixed crop and livestock areas on the planet, or the major ones. Notice there is a clear north-south and then central planet divide. That's because, remember, commercial agriculture tends to be dominated by developed countries, by the richer countries of the world. Mixed crop and livestock almost always involves what's known as crop rotation. This happens when the farm is divided into different sections, and those different sections of the farm grow different crops and or graze animals in order to sustain fertility. And through time, each field will grow a different crop and then occasionally house the animals. A lot of times this is grains like corn, and grasses like oats or hay grass, clover. The land can be left fallow, and then the animals are going to rotate through this over time. So if you take a look, let's pretend like this is a farm, okay? And I've split the farm into 4 sections. If you take a look at this picture that I initially showed you with the mixed crop and livestock, notice you have the cattle in the foreground on one type of landscape. In the background, you can see that yellow growing back there, which is a different type of landscape and different crops. And then in between them, that green, which is something completely different. That's what mixed crop and livestock is about. You're going to rotate through this. So let's say that this is the first year. And number 1 is going to represent grazing, number 2 is corn, number 3 is fallow, and number 4 is grasses. Like I said, maybe hay grass or oats or something. So the first year, this is where each of these things is going to be produced. The second year, watch what happens. We all move. The third year, move again. Fourth year, rotate again. And by the 5th year, you're back to where you started. By doing that, you can maintain fertility in the soil, provided you do it correctly. A lot of this is done in what's known as the Corn Belt in the United States, which you can see in that light green, which includes most of the upper Midwest, and then the area around the Great Lakes, which is where we have a lot of the dairy farms in the United States. The dairy farms are going to, in a lot of cases, import food from the mixed crop and livestock areas so that they can feed the cattle. Now, a lot of our mixed crop and livestock also involves feedlots. A feedlot is a place where the animals are sequestered in very tight conditions. They don't graze in any natural way. The food is brought into them. And you can see that one of the issues here is that the animals are going to be very close to each other. And as a result of being very close to each other, if an animal has disease, it's going to spread the disease. So what do the farmers do? In many cases, they just automatically put antibiotics into the animals through the feed to combat the diseases that get spread. Is that good? Is that bad? It's something to think about for sure. And you can see that most of the pork that we get in the United States is raised in feedlots. Most of the milk that we get comes from feedlots. And a substantial amount of the cattle, the beef that we get, comes from feedlots. So take a look at that, and you can see the difference between those 3 pictures of feedlots. These animals are grazing. They're out in the open. Those other animals are held in feedlots. Those are dairy cattle, by the way. So there's something called feed conversion ratios, or FCRs. They measure the amount of feed or crops needed to produce 1 unit of meat. So in other words, how many pounds of crop does it take to produce 1 pound of meat? There's something called efficiency ratios that go along with this that describe how efficient different animals are at converting feed or crops into meat or milk or eggs. For chickens, it takes between 2 and 5 pounds of feed to produce 1 pound of chicken meat. For pigs, it takes between 4 and 9 pounds of feed to produce 1 pound of pig meat. And for cows, it's between 6 and 25 pounds of feed to produce 1 pound of cow meat. So chickens are obviously the most efficient. They have the highest FCR. But of course, there's something that has to do with live weight versus edible weight. Because anybody who's eaten pork ribs knows that most of what you get with pork ribs is bone, and we're not eating that. We're just eating the meat that's around it. So live weight is the entire mass of the animal, and edible weight is what we as humans are actually going to consume. And obviously, as you transition from live weight to edible weight, what's going to happen is the efficiency goes down. It takes more feed to produce edible weight on an animal. You're not eating probably the chicken head or the chicken feet or the feathers. Those things are wasted or they're used for something else. So this is why this is done in wealthy countries, because wealthy countries can afford to waste like that. In other words, a wealthy country can afford to take corn and put it into an animal and then eat the animal, so that you're decreasing the efficiency of those calories. Because in order for us to get the calories out of the corn, we have to eat the pig. And in order for us to eat the pig has to gain weight eating those calories. And so it's not very efficient. Is this intensive or extensive? Well, the crops are extensive because they tend to be grains and grasses. But the animals, because of the feedlots, tend to be intensive.